Good morning.
Good morning.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Greater Naples. I'm Patty Griffith, and Dave, my husband, will be doing the sermon today. So we're happy to see you all here and welcome you. If you haven't been with us before, we hope that you will come back, and we hope that after the service you will join us for refreshments outside and coffee in the kitchen area and fellowship. We would love to have you do that. We are, as you know, a liberal congregation, and we have a series of lectures coming up which have not yet appeared in the newsletter or anywhere, but I wanted to remind you of those. It's going to be called A Program on Liberal Religion, which will focus on the works of Karen Armstrong, as actually today's sermon does as well. And it starts on the 29th of October and runs for 3 consecutive Wednesdays at 10 a.m., and the speaker will be Dave. So, and before we continue on with our service, these keys were put into the recycling bin. Do they belong to anyone? They're yours. Oh. Okay, sorry about that. Someone brought them up to me. Okay, so I have them. All right. So once again, welcome to you all, and thank you for being here with us this morning.
Just as a reminder, turn off all your electronic devices, please. I'd like to mention that I first became aware of Rabbi Heschel through someone that many of you know and admired as much as I did, Ron Miller, a priest who spoke here many times over the years and who sadly passed away. The human idea of God has a history. God, since it has always meant something slightly different to each group of people who have used it at various points in time, the idea of God formed in one generation by one set of human beings could be meaningless in another. Indeed, the statement, "I believe in God," has no objective meaning as such, but like any other statements, only means something in context. When proclaimed by a particular community, and consequently there is no one unchanging idea contained in the word God. Instead, the word contains a whole spectrum of meanings which are contradictory or even mutually exhaustive. Had the notion of God not had this flexibility, it would not have survived to become one of the great human ideas. When one conception of God has ceased to have meaning or relevance, it has been quietly discarded and replaced by a new theology. Now the children's hymn.
If you'll open your hymnals, we'll now do our first hymn, number 402, "From You I Receive," and we will sing it through 3 times.
For the chalice reading, our friend Kira Krajewski is going to light the children's and the adults' chalice. That's good. Good.
Go ahead and I'll just leave it. It's stubborn. You know, it only wants. So, there we go.
It just wanted to be used once, I guess. Please let's read the chalice lighting together. Flame of fire, spark of the universe that warmed our ancestral hearth, agent of life and death, symbol of truth and freedom, we strive to understand ourselves and our earthly home.
Good morning. I'll invite all our children and youth to come up this morning for our message. Come close for our story. So the story I have for you today has that word in it that our opening reading was from, that Dave shared with us. What was that word that he talked about? Did anyone remember? Starts with a G. No one was listening. You may have to read it again, Dave. He talked about, anyone? God. And what was one of the things he said about that word and its definition and its meaning? Does it mean just one thing, Lexi? Exactly. It can mean many things to different people. So I have a story today about God, and I'm going to give you one version of God, but there are thousands. So if you don't like my version, you can put your version in. But I need your help for this story. You're going to participate, okay? So when I look at you and I say a certain word, you're going to have to say that word. So it's audience participation for everyone, including people, the adults in the sanctuary. So once upon a time, there was a village, kind of like our sanctuary here. And the thing about that village was there was a road right down the middle of it, just like this here. And one day, something very strange happened. Guess who came walking right down that road? God. And she was beautiful. And she had a long flowing cape, and she had a wonderful hat on. And all the people on both sides of the road looked up at her in awe. And off she went smiling on her way to the next village. And after she left, a man said, "Wow, God sure was beautiful." And I loved that blue hat that she was wearing. And a woman on the other side said, "She was beautiful, but you are wrong. Her hat was red." And they started arguing on both sides of the road. And everyone on this side said, "What a beautiful red hat." And pretty soon the whole village was chanting red. Can you help me? Red, red. And on the other side, everyone over here was saying blue. And pretty soon they got so loud and they argued so much that they decided to build a wall right down the middle of this road so they didn't have to see those people that were wrong on the other side of the wall. And many years passed, and the people on this side were enemies of the people on this side. And the people on this side built a church, and in that church, they worshiped a God who wore a blue hat. And on this side over here, they built a church, and the people over here worshiped a God that had a red hat. And many years went by, and one day, guess who came walking back through that village? God. But this time, she had to balance on top of this wall that had been built, and she looked both sides of that wall at those people, and she smiled. And they were so happy because after all those years, they could get the answer to their question, and they could prove to the people on the other side that they were right. And so a man came running up and said, "God, we need you to help us. You need to tell us, what color was that hat you were wearing all those years ago?" And she thought for a minute, and there was a little boy on one side who hadn't been born when that had happened. And he had just been learning about his colors. And he said, "Maybe that hat was purple." And they hadn't thought of that. Oh, boy. And just then God picked up a hat, and she said, "You mean this hat?" And all the people on the red side looked at that hat, and they said, "Yeah, that was the hat." And all the people on this side looked at it and said, "Yeah, that was the hat." And then God did something. She took that hat and she turned it around 180 degrees, and everyone went, "Ah!" Because guess what? The people on this side that thought that hat was red, well, they hadn't seen the other side of the hat. And when God turned it around, guess what they saw? The other side of the hat was blue. And the people on this side saw that there was red on the other side of that hat. And there was silence in that village. And off God went with a smile on her face. And all of a sudden, the silence was broken by a little girl who started laughing. Can you guys help me out? Can you laugh? Come on, you can do better. Can you all laugh? And that laughter made that wall shake and crumble, and pretty soon, it fell down. And the people on this side saw their long-lost friends on this side, who they thought were their enemies, and they crossed that road and they shook hands, and once again they were friends, and they had learned something. And for many, many years in that village, they told the story of God's hat and how laughter had broken down that wall between a divided and somewhat foolish people. So I hope whenever you hear that word God, you will remember the story of God's hat. Thank you.
I love that story. Now it's time for Joys and Sorrows, which, as you know, we do every week. It's a time to share both the happy things in our lives and also our misfortunes, perhaps, illnesses, whatever, that you would like to share. So if anyone has one, then I would ask the ushers to please bring a microphone, and just please be sure that you don't do announcements or opinions. Yeah. If not, then please rise as you are able and sing hymn 38, Morning Has Broken.
I was wonderfully pleased a few weeks ago when Reverend Tony asked all of us to sit in our chair in a kind of meditative position. And that's what I'd like to do myself, having been a fan of meditation for many years. What I'd like you to do is just keep your feet, if you can, on the floor. Put your arms in a restful position, maybe along your thighs or in your lap. Try to just, without what we call discursive thinking, without trying to critique anything, simply spend a few moments in quiet thoughtfulness, trying to kind of empty the mind. And then I'd ask Richard to break in with his meditative song, and I'd like you all to just dwell on that. Let it kind of sweep over you in relaxation and quiet. So let's get in our positions, right? Everybody ready? I want you to then close your eyes. And now I want you to spend just a second making sure your body is free of tension. And now begin to either concentrate on your breath or peace, or just sit quietly and let the quiet cover you. Isn't that a pleasant way to be for a few minutes? Well, we're now going to do the responsive reading, which is in your hymnals on reading 650. I'll start and then we'll alternate. Cherish your doubts, which I think is very fitting for today's service. I really think this is by Robert Weston, and it's just excellent. So I'll begin. Cherish your doubts, for doubt is the attendant of truth.
Doubt is the key to the door of knowledge. It is the servant of discovery.
A belief which may not be questioned binds us to error, for there is incompleteness and imperfection in every belief.
Doubt is the touchstone of truth. It is an acid which keeps away the false.
Let no one fear for the truth, that doubt may consume it, for doubt is a testing of belief.
The truth stands boldly and unafraid. It is not shaken by the testing.
For truth, if it be truth, arises from each testing stronger, more secure.
Those that silence doubt are filled with fear. Their houses are built on shifting sands.
But those who fear not doubt and know its use are founded on rock.
They shall walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure.
It is to the wise as, oh, did I skip one? Thou shalt walk in the light of growing knowledge. The work of their hands shall endure. Thank you all. Okay, now we will do the offering. And we often say that those of you who are first-time visitors need just pass the plate and be our guest. We're delighted to have you. And if the ushers would come forward. My reading today is from Karen Armstrong, which, because of the upcoming series about her major works, I think is very appropriate to give you some kind of sense of what Karen is trying to tell us in her liberal religion. She's become a figure of just incredible stature and among the theologically bent, and even the secularist and probably many agnostics. So I think she talks to all of us. And I'll read a small portion of it. The history of the idea of God has the human idea of God has a history, since it has always meant something to various groups at different times. The idea of God formed in one generation by some of its human beings could be meaningless in another. Indeed, the statement, "I believe in God," has no objective meaning as such, but like other statements, only means something in context when proclaimed by a particular community. Consequently, there is no one unchanging idea in the word God. Instead, the word contains a whole spectrum of meanings, some of which are contradictory or even mutually exclusive. Had the notion of God had this flexibility, it would not have survived and become one of the great human ideas. When the conception of God has ceased to have meaning or relevance, it is properly discarded. And I think I just read you the same thing. Okay, next. Today's sermon is a risky one for a group of Unitarians. I'm going to start off by asking a question. How many of you, without being bogged down in definitions, believe in God? Raise your hands. Okay, how many of you are convinced God does not exist? Well, it's almost half and half. I assume the rest of you are agnostic. Or maybe you just think the question is nonsense. I don't know. But most of us would be hard-pressed, if asked to define or describe God. I have actually done this in classes at Hodges University and seen the confusion on people's faces as they grapple with this definition or understanding of God. One man said that when he thought of an infinite, invisible God, all he could imagine was a huge field of tapioca. Well, I'm not going to talk today about tapioca. But rather, how people grapple with the idea of God, beginning with many different peoples from ancient times to the present. From the earliest times, people have believed in a hidden world beyond the visible world, and we've talked about that before. Attempts to connect to this invisible world gave their tribe and individuals a sense that life mattered, that it was meaningful. Taking their cue from the nature of the tribe and its most powerful, wise, and effective leader, this often led to an image of God taken from the tribal chieftain. What else could you think of that was more powerful than in the world around you than its chief? They often developed other gods for specific purposes such as war, love, harvest. But as Karen Armstrong says, people worship the gods to ask for help during a crisis, to secure divine blessing for the tribe, and to experience a healing sense of continuity with the past. Religion was a matter of cult and ritual rather than ideas, and it was based upon emotion. Dances, prayers, and other rituals sought to win the gods to their favor. She makes a point which I haven't written here, but I think is very interesting, that people long for ecstatic events. events in which they merge themselves. Just look at a rock concert or people who cling around and want to be close to a rock star or a media figure or something. And we get that sense of the attempt to merge in with the group surrounding it, to be part of that group. So dance, prayers, and rituals are really the basis and trying to secure God's favor to their lives. The history of God derives from many sacred scriptures and theologians at differing times, but many of our friends and neighbors are locked into a meaning which they proclaim is not subject to question. However, when asked to describe God in specific terms, they just run away, turn away. They know that God is anthropomorphic, human-like. He has eyes and ears and moral teachings and all sorts of things. Like the tribal chieftain, they think he hands down laws, judgments, and punishments like the old chief did. They retain an Old Testament concept of God. For most of us, our first concrete image of God came from Genesis. Quote, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." However, two questions appear here. One, is there an absolute starting point for the beginning of time? And second, is that God that caused the earth to be created not a part of it? These concepts are not found in Eastern religions and have become controversial in the Abrahamic. We will talk about these some more. Of course, the story was written down in about the 7th century BC based on traditional stories and Hebrew stories even going back further. The concept of that early God, though he possessed tremendous powers, was also very human. He was not omnipresent since he couldn't find Adam as he walked in the Garden of Eden, and he yelled, "Where are you?" That's interesting. He was not omniscient, as he didn't know that they had actually eaten the forbidden fruit, and he had to ask Adam, who, of course, blamed it on Eve. He was not even omnipotent, but more of a tribal chief with very human characteristics. The conception of God, or Yahweh, was very much a God in the same manner as Baal, Anat, or Marduk. Gods of the tribes are their neighbors. But Yahweh was to be the only God of the Jews and not one of their neighbors. He covenanted with them as a tribe and gave them his blessing and guaranteed to make their name great. He could demand that his tribe defeat other tribes, such as the Canaanites at Jericho, kill all its men and women, livestock, pillage, everything of value found there. He was not a universal God, and certainly not revered by the non-Israelites. But other gods were similarly partisan for their people. A period of significant conscience shift occurred during the period of 800 BC to 200 BC. This was called the Axial Age. The tribal gods of the Middle East began to be replaced as cities and trade flourished. Citizens of different communities began peaceful communications and greater acceptance of one another. The role of kings and chieftains gradually gave way to the wealth and power provided by the capitalist class of merchants and traders in the marketplace. The process shifted the image of the gods from the tribal chieftain to the increasingly powerful new classes whose need for new kinds of God, new ideas of God, were consistent with their newfound prominence. Religion started to accept and defend a concept of God with less tribal and more universal ideas. Since there were many different people who needed to respect each other, new ways of working together had to emerge. Religion became more focused on the individual than the tribe, and monotheism arrived in the Middle East and weakened tribal boundaries. But the Greeks, like Plato and Aristotle, took a new approach. The invisible world existed for them too. And it's reflected in the perfect forms of Plato and Aristotle. Both thought that all things in the visible world emerge from a perfect form in the invisible world. How else could a tiny seed turn into a beautiful palm tree? How could a seed turn into a human being? Aristotle's theory of the forms was that somewhere in a different dimension of existence, there is a world where forms exist in their perfection. And Plato felt that somehow each thing as it emerges, is trying to attain that perfect form. Aristotle put it a little bit different. He said that the form isn't just out in the different dimension. It is a divine seed inside each thing, struggling to become that which it is to become. So this is a very different idea, about God. This is the highest level of reality. This is more biology or botany than the religious ideas that had come before. Aristotle's new theory of forms immanent in each living thing is called teleology. This was an attempt to explain the imperfect world in the visible world, struggling to become the perfection of the form inside it. It was not about a personal God at all, but a divine principle which existed in the divine dimension and created the forms in the visible world. Of course, the majority of the populace continued to believe in the ancient gods, but revolutionary thinking was arising in Greek academies. The scholars believed the gods had no interest in their well-being. Actually, logic and reason were the paths to create meaning in the world. Science became a basis for their philosophic thought, and the Greeks, of course, put Socrates to death for denying the gods and corrupting the youth with his radical thinking. Around the same time, in the 4th century of the Axial Age, new thinking about God was also changing in the Asian world. The gods of Hinduism were not discarded, but relegated to a lesser status as the source of these gods, called the Godhead. And this Godhead became known as Brahman. Brahman is an ineffable, it's a transcendental reality from which even the gods and the world emerged. The Buddha himself accepted the basic idea of Brahman and believed that the experience of Brahman cannot be explained rationally any more than music or poetry. Intelligence is necessary to creating art and appreciating it, but the complete understanding of any artistic work goes far beyond logic and reason as it's applied to the material world. Similarly, the Taoist, Lao Tzu, said that the Tao is the ultimate reality, but we are incapable of using logic to penetrate its meaning. The reason for our failure to understand ultimate reality or God is that it is immanent and all-powerful in the universe. The Tao, it's not matter, it is that which creates matter. The Tao is the source of the emanation that is in the world. This concept is much closer to Aristotle's forms, the Tao and the Brahman, as it is invisible to us and not anthropomorphic at all. The Axial Age needed to craft a new vision because humanity had taken a social and psychological leap forward. People had discovered that the old tribal ethic, which had developed from a communal mentality to ensure the survival of the group, was replaced by a new individualism. The sages of the time demanded that every single person become self-conscious, aware of what he was doing, and take responsibility for those actions before God. The great scientific revolution began in the 15th and 16th centuries and brought years of struggle between science and the church. The attempts of science to deny the existence of God and religion denying the validity of science when it conflicted with sacred text led to increasing sophistication of those finding a role for each. This is a quote from Houston Smith, a highly regarded theologian. Today, we are making another quantum leap forward. Our science has created a global society which is interconnected electronically, militarily, economically, and politically. We now have to develop a global consciousness because we live in one world. And further on, he says, there is arguably no more important and pressing topic than the relationship of science and religion in the modern world. Science is clearly one of the most profound methods that humans have yet devised for discovering truth, while religion remains the greatest force for generating meaning. Truth and meaning, science and religion, but we will still figure out how to get the two of them together in a way that both find acceptable. Now, scientific people deny supernatural explanations and are left with only a metaphoric or historical understanding of the Bible. They differentiate themselves from those fundamentalists who still cling to biblical concepts of an anthropomorphic God and his angels and his miracles, etc. They know that religion can't contradict known science. Others just discard the old notion of God and become convinced that science can explore and understand the truths of the world, and religion is simply not needed. Houston Smith disagrees and states that science and technology have created a global and transnational framework of economic, industrial, medical, and scientific systems. Yet, however beneficial those systems may be, they are all in themselves devoid of meaning and value. Thus, this enormous global scientific infrastructure is, in itself, a valueless skeleton. However functional they might be. As we know, German universities in World War II and German scientists jumped at the chance to work on the Holocaust camps. V-2 rockets, ethnic cleansing. Could authentic religion blunt the pernicious actions in all society? Does any religion profess to have a God who justifies the Holocaust? In the Eastern religions and some of the Abrahamic, God and life's meanings are found not in the objective world of things which science does such a successful job of understanding. Eastern religions go inside. They discover the meaning of life in deep meditations that delve into human consciousness. Mystics and advanced meditators achieve a state of superconsciousness, which has been detected as different from sleeping, dreaming, or being awake. When in this deep state, their EEGs are very steady and orderly. It is reported that in these mental states, people experience glimpses of ultimate reality and perfect tranquility. Advanced meditators report a unity with all existence, an emerging of the self into the larger whole of all that is. They explain that words fail to describe this experience. However, one description was that it was like losing the individual self and experiencing the universe as an interdependent and infinite totality. Some physicists have said that their study of the quantum world was similar to them. Henry Morgenau, an esteemed professor at Yale of physics, says, if my conclusions are correct, each individual is a part of God or the universal mind. Now remember, we're going to get these terms, kind of moving: super consciousness, universal mind, God, whatever. Each of us is the universal mind, but inflicted with limitations that obscure all but a tiny fraction of its aspects and properties. Other physicists have also made statements that the underlying property of the universe is a field of information which forms consciousness and provides the laws and properties necessary for its evolution. Mystics would comment that with sufficient meditative skills and proper lifestyle, these limitations of normal consciousness could be surpassed. The history of God has changed radically over time. The tribal chieftain of the early Middle Ages merged into a loving and caring God of later times. Then it was realized that all the gods were just different names for one God of all. During the Axial Age, new concepts of gods arose, which replaced the old man on the throne with Plato's forms, Aristotle's teleological presence, the invisible Tao, and the Brahman gods. God was the creative power of the universe, but many believed he no longer intervened in human affairs. More people began to deny the existence of anything transcendent or immanent in the universe. Today, there are many still trying to resurrect the old conception of a personal God that sits in moral judgment over us. Others have found that the sciences can replace God, religion, and even moral teachings with no loss to our search for meaning. I guess I'm obligated, after all this, to tell you what I think. It's not tapioca, but rather as it's conceived in Brahman, a Buddhism which acknowledges the transcendent and higher consciousness, but without denying that it must be compatible with science. It is our underlying connection and participation in all that is. Amen. Now hymn 311. We do. May I have this dance with you through the good times and the bad times too. Let it be a dance. Something of a mood changer, right? My closing words will be from Theodore Parker, number 683 in your hymnal. Be ours a religion which, like sunshine, goes everywhere. Its temple, all space, its shrine, the good heart, its creed, all truth, its ritual, works of love, its profession of faith, divine living.